Hi, I'm Jimmy. In this video, we're looking at the possible opportunities and pitfalls from the volatility that occurred in the stock market after the US launched a drone strike that killed a top Iranian commander. And hopefully, we can use this knowledge to ultimately get each of us closer to our own personal goal of financial freedom. So the reason I wanted to make this video is, as I've been watching the news come across the wire about the drone strike, I can't help but think of Warren Buffett's very famous saying where he says, "Be fearful when others are greedy and greedy when others are fearful." And as an example, when we look at what's been happening with the oil market, well, we can see that oil prices have spiked. They spiked overnight after the news came out. I believe it was Thursday night. Friday, oil prices were up big. And on one hand, this is completely logical. The Middle East is clearly a huge player in the oil markets, but oil prices jumped almost 4%. And that seems like a reaction that is very much based on fear and not fundamentals. There's no less oil being produced today than there were just a few days ago. And I bring this out not because I think we should get involved in oil, but I'm trying to stay mindful of what is a logical reaction to things and what is simply investors being fearful. Not long ago, there was an attack that was directly on, I believe it was an oil refinery, and oil prices once again shot up. There was fear of a restriction in the supply. That didn't happen, and shortly after that, the prices came back down. Now, this stuff has a ripple effect to it. Another example is airline stocks. When we flip through some of the airline stocks, well, we can see that on Friday, airline stocks really pulled back as the price of oil climbed. But once again, we have to ask, is this fear driving this price change, or is it a fundamental change here? Now, if oil prices recover, I would make the case that this pullback shouldn't really happen in the airline stocks. So perhaps, going back to Buffett's statement of buying when others are fearful, if airline stocks are something that we've been looking at, perhaps this is the opportunity we've been after. Okay, then there's something like gold. Now, this is the price of gold. And as we can see, the price of gold has risen a lot recently. And although the recent rally in the gold prices weren't completely tied to this, Friday gold was up after the whole drone strike happened. And clearly there's a question as to what Iran's reaction to this is going to be. And ultimately, although gold doesn't really have a fundamental way of analyzing it, it is known as one of the top defensive holdings. This is ultimately a reaction. This is a flight to safety. So what's the best move as far as gold is concerned? Well, I'm guessing that as long as tensions remain heightened, well, gold could continue to do quite well. Now, on a personal basis, I'm not sure it makes sense to jump into gold at this point from an investment standpoint, certainly not based solely on this information, because to my way of thinking, jumping in on gold anytime soon in reaction to this is the same thing as following the pack, which is exactly what we want to avoid as investors. And this brings us to another logical opportunity that's being impacted by the recent news events, and that is defense stocks, or companies like Lockheed Martin or Raytheon or Northrop Grumman or General Dynamics. Well, we can see that with each of these companies, they are all moving higher as the possibility of a military conflict increases. Now, for me, this actually presents more of an opportunity to sell the stock than there is to buy it, since, as we said before, we don't want to jump in and follow the pack and jump in here just because we think that there's a chance that the stock could move higher. I'm inclined to look at what's happening with the individual businesses, compare that to the take the fundamentals of the company, compare that to what's been happening with the stock based on the news, making our decision based off of that. Now, it's likely that the fundamentals of these companies haven't changed, at least not yet. Now, if we got involved in any of these stocks for the long term, well, to me, this type of reaction, even if it's an overreaction and the stock seems overpriced now, if we got involved in this the past year or two and we intended to hold it for the long run, to me, it wouldn't make sense to jump out of this based on short-term news events. I would lean on not overreacting to any one piece of news. Obviously, depending on our investment goals, well, that would perhaps sway how we would react to any one piece of news, especially our investment horizon. But I think the most important thing for us to consider doing is to try to avoid doing what everybody else is doing. If everybody else is buying, we're probably buying at a price that's too high. If everybody else is selling, we're probably selling too low. I really think it's important that we each think for ourselves and try to logic things out as much as possible. Now, one possibility that I've personally done myself on many occasions, and I'm actually a big fan of doing, if you're comfortable with it, and that is selling options. Now, I say selling options and not buying options because on days like Friday, where there's an increase in volatility and everything goes a little bit crazy, well, all options become more valuable. So for buying options, well, we're likely to pay more when volatility is higher. Generally, we don't want to do that. But if we do want to generate some dividend-like income from selling call options based on our investments, well, selling covered calls could make sense. Now, I've actually been thinking about doing more videos on options. If that's something you'd like to see, please let me know in the comments below. I'm a huge fan of options, and I think they can be a very powerful tool if they're used properly. And they're frankly quite dangerous if people don't know how to use them, but I do think the opportunity is there. Now, if you're looking to find out more about options now, well, in this video, I walk through the basics of covered calls. So if you're interested, that could be a good next video to watch. And I really want to thank you for sticking with me all the way to the end of the video. I hope you found this interesting. Thanks, and I'll see you in the next video.